Hello YouTube and welcome back to another Blender tutorial. Today we are doing the first part in a series of tutorials on how to make a basic game in Blender using Python. So if you haven't seen part 0, that's a kind of introductory video. I'm using the game logic layout, and of course we're switched into Blender game. But other than that, we're going to start fresh and clean. So we're not going to need this test script anymore, so we can just hit X, and we can make our new script. And since we're going to be doing the movement today, why don't we call this script movement? So Python is a object-oriented programming language. That means that it uses classes or objects which hold methods and variables and all kinds of stuff. It uses those to do, well, everything. So Blender has a bunch of Python classes that you can use to do stuff with the Blender game engine. But how do you know what you can do? Well, it's really simple. You can use a Google search and just search for Blender Python reference. And you should get to this webpage here, blender.org/API/BlenderPython and some sort of release number. Once you get here, if you scroll down, you can see we've got this section called Game Engine Modules, and that's where we'll spend pretty much all of our time. You can see we have types, logic, render, texture, events, constraints, app. The biggest one we're going to use is logic, because that has to deal with the game logic. So you can see if we click on that link, we get here and we can see there's all kinds of information. And you can read through all of this. You can see, what all of the variables we have here for logic, all of the functions that we get. But I'm going to give you a little bit of guidance for how I would suggest reading through the API. So we know that we want to make this cube move, but we have no idea how we're going to do that. So let's think of what we need to do to make it move. Well, we need to make the cube move. So maybe if we found some sort of game object class or object class, we would find some sort of move function in there. So if we go to our reference, we can look a little bit here and we can see, oh, well, there's kx_game_object. That looks interesting because it's a game object, and that's what the cube is. And if we look down through here, you could read down through this yourself, but if we look down through here, we can see eventually we get to a spot where we see apply movement, which seems to be exactly what we want. Okay, so we need to get down to this kx_game object. If we go back, we can see that that is a member of the bge.logic class. So that's where we need to start. We need to get the bge.logic class. So we need to make it so that our script can use that. In order to do that, we import that module. To do that, I'm going to type in from bge, and that's because that is the base class. And then I'm going to type in import logic. Okay, so that means that anywhere else in our script that we want to, we can use logic, and then we can put in a dot, and we can call any of these other functions or variables that we want. So you can see here it's logic.getCurrentScene. If we wanted to use that method, we would just have to type it in. And you can see in the reference that they offer some explanation as to what these methods do. So for instance, getCurrentScene, well, it gets the current scene. And you can see it even gives us a return type, which is types scene. And we can click on that and we can get even more information. Okay, so if we look down through this logic class, there's all kinds of functions and stuff. But what we want is a way to get to that game object. And if you see here, we can get a Python controller that's associated with the Python script. And you'll notice that this Python controller is attached to our cube. So it makes sense that we would want to get this controller. So you can see the function here is just .getCurrentController. And since we'll use that later, you can see it returns a Python controller. Since we may want to use this later, why don't we put it into a variable? So we can just do controller equals logic.getCurrentController. And since this is a method, you'll notice it has parentheses there. We always need to make sure we have those. And then we can hit enter to go down to the next line. I'm just going to stretch this over a little bit so it all fits on the screen. Okay, so now we have this controller object, and it is held as a variable. So if we click this little link here, we can then see all of the different attributes and methods that we have on this controller module. Well, look at this. We've got owner, and this is the object the controller is attached to. Well, that's exactly what we want. And since we might use this object later in our script, let's go ahead and put it in another variable. I always, in my script, whenever I'm writing for an object that the script is going to be attached to, I like to use own or owner. Some people use obj, some people use object. It's personal preference. But for this tutorial, I'm going to be using own, and I'm going to set it equal to controller. If we go back to our reference here, you can see that it is just owner. So all we have to do is .owner. Okay, so now we've got our owner. Why don't we go ahead and see what happens if we print out the owner? So we can print own. And let's go ahead and save by hitting Control S or by going to File Save. If we play our game and go to our console, you can see it prints the name of the object. So we are printing cube, which is the name of the object. So now we want to make our object move. We've gotten all the way down to our object, and we can see down through here, get back to where we were before. You can see we've got tons of methods and attributes, but what we're looking for is this apply movement function. So you can see in the reference that methods will show you what their parameters are. So here we can see it's movement, comma local equals false. If you see a parameter that has an equals in there, that means that it's not necessary, but this is its default value. So for instance, I could do apply movement with just the movement. I don't even need to feed in this second argument, but it will default to false. Okay, so we can see what the movement is. It is a 3D vector. That would be X, Y, and Z. And we can see what local is. So we can see false, it means you get the global movement. True means you get the local movement. All right, so let's go ahead and try this method out real quick. So let's just do own dot apply movement, open parentheses, and we can see that because it is a method. And then we need movement, which is a 3D vector. One way of feeding this function is to feed it a list of X, Y, and Z values. And to do that, all we need is a bracket, like a square bracket. And then we can type in the X, Y, and Z values that we want. So let's say we want this to move up on the Y-axis. So I'm going to type in 0 for the X. And we're going to want a fairly low number because it's going to move pretty quickly. So let's do 0.1 for the Y. And you'll notice I separate these with a comma. And then comma, and we want 0 for the Z. And then we'll close that bracket, and we can even close the function right now because it doesn't need that second argument. Okay, so if we save our game and we play it, I don't know if you could see that, but the cube just it moves forward just a little bit. And that's because this Python script is only being run once. So if we turn on the pulse mode here, and let me zoom out a little bit, if we play the game, we can see the object is moving along the y-axis. Okay, so now why don't we go ahead and figure out how we're going to get it to read the WSA and D keys. We can use just purely Python to read the keys, but an easier way to do it is to use the keyboard sensors. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to do W for W key. It's going to be just like that. I'm going to turn pulse mode on. Add another keyboard sensor. This one will be S. Uses the S key. Turn pulse mode on. Another keyboard sensor. A, pulse. Oops. And finally, D and pulse. And we can wire all of these sensors into the same Python controller. Okay, so if we go back to our reference, if we do a Control F for search, we can see that there is a sensors attribute. So this is going to contain a list, or here you can see a sequence of iSensor objects. So this is going to contain a list of all of the sensors that are on this object. Well, we want to read these sensors, so that sounds like what we want. And since we're going to be using that a fair bit later, we can send that to a variable. So let's go ahead and do sensors equals own dot sensors. Okay, so at this point, we're going to start setting up some logic. In programming languages, you have what are called flow control statements. So we've got if statements, while loops, for loops, but for now we're just going to mess with the if statement. And we can use this to read the sensors. And if we go back to our reference and we click on this sensor object, you can see we have a bunch of different attributes. And if we go down through here, you can see we've got triggered or positive. And you can also even read the status. But we're just going to use positive because you see it returns true if the sensor brick is in a positive state, which would mean that the key is being pressed. So what we can do with this is we can say if sensors, and then because sensors is a list, we can get an item out of it by just simply using an open bracket, and then we can find the sensor by its name. So all we have to do is put in a quotation mark, the name of the sensor, then a closed quotation mark, and a closed square bracket. And this will get us the W sensor. So then we're going to want to find out if it's positive. So we just do dot positive. And at the end of an if statement, you will always put a colon, just like that. And you'll notice if you hit enter, it auto-indents to the next level. And that's how Python can tell where an if statement begins and ends. So we can add a statement in here, like print hello, and close parentheses. And if we say, okay, that's all we want to do with that if statement, if we just backspace back to the beginning here so that we're on the same level as the if statement, now we're back into the main program. So once this if statement finishes, this next line will run. So we can go ahead and save this, and if we play the game and hit the W key, we can then exit the game and go to our console, and you can see it printed a bunch of hellos. What we can do here then is if we press the W key, we can apply a movement to our object. So let's say that we want forward to be on the y-axis. So we can just do, in this if statement, own dot apply movement, and then we can use our vector again. So open bracket, x, y, well, y we're going to do 0.1, and then we can do z as 0, close bracket, and close parentheses. So now, if we can save our game and we can play the game, and whenever we hit W, the cube moves. So all we have to do to apply the rest of the movements, is we can add more if statements. So if sensors, and then the way you usually say this is sub. So this would be sensors sub s would be that. And we want to see if it's positive. And if it is, we're going to apply movement. And we can do open parentheses and an open bracket. And then we're going to want the S key to move it down on the y-axis. So we can put in a negative 0.1 here, a comma, 0, close bracket, and a close parentheses. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add the A and D, and I'm just going to use values on the x-axis, and then I will be right back. Okay, so you can see here I've done basically just the same thing, except I made it so that I'm adding a number in on the x-axis. Okay, so if we save our game and we hit play, we now can move our cube in any direction that we want. Pretty cool, huh? And if we press two of the opposite keys at the same time, you can see that it stops, which is like you would expect, and we get our nice 45-degree angles. Okay, so already I can see a perfect place to use a variable. So you can see here how we manually typed in this 0.1, negative 0.1, and 0.1. It makes sense for us to turn that into a variable so that we can change it in just one place and it will change all of these. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's call it speed equals, then we can do a 0.1. And now, anywhere down here in our movement, we can put in speed for where 0.1 is. And so now, if we want to change how fast our character moves, we just have to change it in this one place instead of going through and typing in a new number at all of those spots. So for instance, I say, I think that looks a little slow. Well, I can just come over here and do 0.5, and now our cube is much faster. Okay, so hopefully that gets you a good head start on Python with Blender. Just keep in mind you can just keep using this reference. It is an excellent resource. The main place you're probably going to be is in this KX game object, which again, you can just find by going, whenever you get to that main page, go down to logic, and you can see game object is right there. And then you can see all of the different methods and attributes that you can get from that object. Because Python is used mainly where you can't use the logic bricks, I don't want to do exactly what the other video series is doing. I want to do something that's a little cooler. Maybe we'll do a side-scrolling shooter with some randomly spawning enemies. I'm not totally sure on that. So go ahead and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you would like, and I'll see if we work it in there. But hopefully this gets you started on Python. All right. So feel free to leave any questions in the comments down below. I will try to respond to you. And that's going to do it for today. So I want to thank you guys very much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.